ways we can use the concepts of sensory processing and self-regulation to kind of help us move through this current pandemic a little bit more easily. Um, so I am an occupational therapist. I took a long road to be here. So in addition to being an OT, I am an evolutionary biologist. I am also a world traveler, and I worked in special education for a long time before I became an OT. And I'm a mom of three. These are my kids here. I've got a 5-year-old Carola, and then these are my twins who are now 18 months old, Iris and Alex. So, you know, I definitely am there with all of you guys, you know, trying to manage and balance everything that's going on at home. And then on top of that, I own my own solo private practice in occupational therapy, which is Hoot Hoot OT. So I'll go ahead and kind of tell you guys a little bit more about OT, because I know a lot of people don't really know what that is. Oh, and before I go into that, I want to kind of just do an overview of what we're going to talk about. So I wanted to just tell you guys how times of change and stress, such as the current pandemic, can affect how we feel and act. I think what you'll see as we go through this presentation is a lot of this stuff I'm going to talk about is likely pretty intuitive to you, but once you hear it out loud, kind of laid out explicitly, it can kind of shape how you think about it and how you apply these concepts in regular life. We're going to talk about what is self-regulation and what is co-regulation. And we're going to talk about what is sensory processing and how sensory processing impacts our state of regulation. And then we're going to talk about how we can modify the properties of the activities we're already doing to promote regulation. So, you know, as I was coming up with this webinar, initially I had all of these great lists of strategies and activities and all these fun things to do to help us regulate ourselves. But I realized that most of us don't have time, and I don't want to burden you with like a whole bunch of things, extra things that you should be doing on top of what you're already doing. So what I'm trying to do is teach you guys about sensory processing and about self-regulation so that you can have some mindfulness around the activities that you're already doing, so that you can learn how to tweak what you're already doing to help regulate yourself and your children a little bit more. So hopefully I'm not adding to the things that you need to do. Hopefully I am just, you know, the whole work smarter, not harder. I'm going to teach you some ways to do the things that you're doing a little bit more effectively. So how do I know about this stuff? Is related to what are occupations and what is occupational therapy. So you can read this quote here, but essentially, as an occupational therapist, my goal is to help people participate in their meaningful occupations. And occupations are essentially the meaningful activities and things in our life that we want and need to do. So occupational therapists work in a very wide range of fields. They work with adults with disabilities, they work in skilled nursing facilities, they work in early intervention with little babies, and if you're like me, I work with children in home setting and in their clinic settings and at school. So I'm looking, when I work with children, I'm looking to see how children are participating in some of the most important occupations for children, which are going to school, doing self-care activities like brushing our teeth, maybe doing a few chores, and then participating in play, which is a super, super important activity for kids. But I know you guys are parents, so there's other occupations that you guys might be involved in too, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So what I do is I look at the occupations that people are participating in, and I try to determine what things, if any, are getting in the way of participating in those occupations. So some of them are environmental things, like the current environmental situation that we have right now is preventing us from participating in a lot of our meaningful occupations, but some of them are more internal things. So it might be that you don't have the motor skills you need to do a certain activity, like maybe you don't know how to move your hand as well as you would like to, so you can't hold a pencil, or you can't write really well. So I look at kind of the fine and gross motor components that contribute to difficulties in participation. And I also look at the self-regulation and sensory processing pieces that contribute to how we participate in occupation. So I'll go into what exactly I mean by that in a lot more detail, but that's kind of what occupational therapy is in a nutshell, helping people figure out how they can better participate in everything that's going on around them that's important. So what I was thinking to just kind of get things started is thinking about how your occupations have changed since the start of the pandemic. And if you are so inclined, I would love to hear in the chat box some occupations that you've either lost or are now doing. So these are some of my ideas of occupations that I didn't have to do that I'm now doing. Like I feel like I'm a dishwasher. I'm washing dishes 24/7 with everybody stuck at home. So if other people have ideas, I kind of love to hear them. Whoopsies. And I don't have my chat box going here. 1 second here. I'm just going to see if my chat box is popping up. Okay. So maybe we're feeling not quite ready to do that, but that's okay. So let me just kind of say again, you know, we have a lot of different occupations going on right now. So in addition to being a parent and a worker, you know, we have to teach our kids and we have to stay at home. We have to control everything that's going on and teach our kids and babysit our kids and do a whole bunch of new types of occupations at work because we're working from home now instead of working in our regular context. So the problem with that is that might lead us to feeling dysregulated. So dysregulated could be any of the feelings such as being anxious and having racing thoughts, a hard time sleeping. Hold on 1 second here. Okay, great. Screen time police chief. Yes, I like that. And motivational speaker. Awesome. Yes, I think those are, I'm just checking the chat here. I think those are important occupations for parents as well. So feeling antsy, so getting back to what does it mean to feel dysregulated? All of these sort of uncomfortable feelings in our body, and they could be kind of on the overstimulated, overwhelmed end, so racing thoughts, thinking really fast, that kind of knot in your stomach and wiggly, or they could be more on the understimulated end, so feeling lethargic, distracted, having just a hard time with focus or feeling depressed. So what this is doing to us is this is really taking a lot of gas out of our tank. So it's leaving us with not very much emotional resilience to deal with all of the little problems that might come across at the end of the day. So maybe normally it wouldn't bother us if our child is whining and asking us for an extra pancake at breakfast, or they don't want to eat their carrots. And normally maybe that wouldn't bother us, but because we're running low on gas from dealing with all of these changes from the pandemic, it makes it really hard to cope with even some of those little things. And just a little point that I wanted to make out is that these feelings of dysregulation might look quite different in your kids. So it might be that they're protesting something that they didn't previously protest, like they don't want to go to music class even though they used to love music class, or they complain that they're feeling tired all day long, or they complain that their stomach hurts, or a lot of like kind of more bodily type things can actually be signs, not that they're actually sick, but that their body isn't feeling how it should be to them. So just to think about, you know, just like we all have a wide range of feelings when we're dysregulated, our kids are going to feel differently than we are too. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what self-regulation, what the definition of self-regulation is. And there's a lot of different definitions out there. So for the purposes of what I'm talking about today, I'm going to reference some ideas from somebody named Leah Kuipers, who is the creator of a social emotional curriculum called the Zones of Regulation. And I have all of these listed at the end of my slide with their websites. So when we record it, you guys will be able to access that. And I'm also going to put all these references on my own website, so you can look up these links on my website too. So Leah Kuipers, and then a lot of you guys might have heard of Stephen Porges. He is the originator of polyvagal theory, which is very popular right now, especially because they have a lot of applications towards trauma, which we're all experiencing. The people who are working with polyvagal theory, I have a few issues with it, but I do like the basic idea that, you know, according to his theory, when we're dysregulated, we can either be over-aroused, overstimulated, moving too fast, or we can be moving too slow. So I think that's a really important piece of his theory. So one of the definitions of regulation is the ability to do what needs to be done to be in the optimal state for a given situation. So what that means is that we have a variety of emotional states and states of arousal that we need to be in throughout the day. So we may need to be in the very slow and sleepy state, for example, when we're trying to go to bed, or if your children, I think most people didn't have 2 young children, but you know, when young children are taking a nap, they need to know how to slow themselves down. And also just when we need to like take a break to rest, we have to be able to slow ourselves down. So we often refer to this as the blue zone, the understimulated zone. The green zone is the appropriate zone for when we want to do learning, paying attention, growing, working, listening. You know, so right now, the optimal state for obtaining information from this webinar would be the green zone. So that's where we're sitting calm and attentive. The yellow zone is the state where we're feeling really excited or maybe anxious or wiggly. So there are appropriate times to be in this state. If you're getting ready to take a big exam, for example, it would be appropriate to be in this sort of slightly anxious, edgy state. Or if you went to Disneyland for the first time, it would be appropriate to be really excited. So it's okay to be in this anxious, wiggly state at some times. And then the last zone that we think about is the red zone. And this is when we've lost control. So this is when we might be angry, yelling, hitting, fighting, just completely out of control. And there are times when it's appropriate to be in this state as well. So if you're being chased by a bear, that might be a time when you want to be able to run away or fight the bear. And so it's appropriate to be in that zone. So my point, like if you're going to be thinking about this or talking about it with your kids or, you know, with yourselves, is to recognize that it's not bad to be in any specific state. All of the states are okay, but there are states that are more appropriate for specific situations. And especially the situation of learning is when we really want to aim to be in this green zone. And some of the interesting things that came out of the polyvagal theory are that when we're in that green zone, we are best able, there are physiological changes that are happening, like things that are modifying the muscles in your ears that actually allow you to hear more information and therefore connect better with others. So when we're in that green zone, we're feeling our best. We're best able to access our skills. So for example, if you were feeling really tired, I wouldn't expect you to be as sharp and quick to respond to my questions than if you were in the green zone. So we best access our skills and we best connect with other people when we're in that green zone. So I just want to take a little pause here, let that information soak in and see if anybody has any questions. You can either unmute yourself or type them in here. But I know there's a lot of information already. Okay, so I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. Okay, so another important thing to understand is that self-regulation is a developmental process. So I've got these hearts here on this slide, and what I'm trying to show is that when you're a baby, you can be regulated, but your own contribution to that regulation is negligible. Mostly the caregivers of the child are responsible for contributing to that child feeling regulated. So again, it's intuitive, but it's also important to explicitly state it and think about it. So as a baby, we rely on our parents to shush us, rock us, sing a song, do anything we need to help the child calm down. And the child really is born not knowing how to do this at all. And then as the child gets older, their contribution to regulation, so that's this blue part in these hearts here, their contribution increases, whereas the parent's contribution decreases. So by the time we get to adolescence or, around puberty, we're obviously not shushing and rocking our children. What we're doing is maybe talking them through a difficult situation, or, if they're in sort of the school age, if a child's friends don't want to play with them, can we brainstorm a list of other friends to play with or other things to do? So it's a continuum, but what you can see is that especially as your children start to, are in the younger ages here, that they need your help to regulate. And the other thing to understand is that we don't always have the same capacity to regulate ourselves throughout any given day or week. So just because your child is able to regulate themselves without your help at 8:00 a.m., they might not be able to do it again at 2 p.m., especially if they're facing a lot of stressors, such as the upheaval that's happening right now as a result of the pandemic. Does living in a pandemic cause our kids to move backwards in this continuum? So I don't think it would we wouldn't move backwards in terms of the skills that we've developed, but what would happen is we would need our parents to take on a little bit more of the regulatory role. So it doesn't mean that we've lost the skills. It means that our skills are being taxed, and we're spending so much energy and resilience on dealing with all of the stresses that are going on, that we might need more of our parents' help to kind of fill up that heart. So maybe normally the child is able to regulate themselves at this level, but the pandemic is kind of, at the middle of the heart, but the pandemic kind of sucked us down to the bottom of the heart. And so they might need more assistance from their parents to stay regulated. So my point in discussing this is just for you guys to understand how important it is to be able to co-regulate your child. So co-regulation, again, is that there's a lot of different definitions of this term as well, but co-regulation is sort of the contribution that the parents give to their child's state of regulation. But in addition to a parent-child interaction, there could be a child's impact on the parent state. So if your children are stressed out, you are likely feeling stressed out. And similarly, I know, for example, when my husband comes home having a bad day at work, about 35 minutes later, I start to feel really cranky too. So our emotional states impact the people around us. And so the role that we play in helping our children regulate themselves comes through what we call affect. So affect is our physical representation of emotions. So that's our tone of voice, our facial expression, the gestures we use, our body language. It's how we teach others or communicate to others how we are feeling. And and this is all something that you guys are all doing. This is not like, this is something that, we instinctively do, but again, I'm trying to make it explicit. The way that we most effectively regulate our children is by attunement, which is aligning our state with what the child needs. So if you have a child that is feeling really shy, it wouldn't be helpful to use a bright affect and say, go on out there and play baseball. Instead, for most children, instead, you might have a calm voice, a quiet voice, and say, okay, I know you're feeling scared, but we're gonna kind of work through it, and I'm gonna be here with you, and you can go play this sports game when you're ready to play it. Whereas if you have a kid and you're at Disneyland for the first time, it would be appropriate for you to have a bright affect and be really excited to be with your kid in Disneyland. So you're communicating with them through all of these parts of your affect, through your eyes, through your nose, or not your nose, through your mouth, through how you express yourself. And that is how we are regulating our children. So my point in teaching you guys about this and talking about this is not to increase your burden. I feel like there's a lot of guilt that's happening right now. And I am not trying to say that you need to be doing more than what you're already doing. What I'm saying is that we need to be sure that we are taking care of ourselves. So before I even get into things that we can do with our kids, I first want you to know things that you can do for yourself. So, you know, I know everyone is worried that they're letting their kids have too much screen time. But you know what? It's okay for your kids to have some screen time if that's what you need to be self-regulated. So maybe you need 45 minutes to read a book or do yoga. Like, I know we probably don't have any time. You probably have negative 45 minutes right now, but, or take a work phone call. You know, if you need some time to help yourself feel regulated, or maybe it's 5 minutes, whatever that time is, it's okay to let your child watch TV or play on the computer if that is going to help you feel more regulated, because then you are going to have an affect that's more attuned to your child, and then that's going to help your child's self-regulation through the rest of the day. So it's okay to do the things that you need to do to take care of yourself. And I know in our culture that's a really difficult thing to do, and we're kind of being asked to do way more than we can. I mean, we don't even have time to take care of our kids, let alone ourselves. So I'm going to try and talk about some ways we can incorporate regulating activities into what we're already doing. But you know, we often use that analogy on the airplane of the oxygen mask, and you put the mask on yourself before you help your kid. Well, I agree with that analogy, but I think the airplane has crashed, and now that's what this is us on our lifeboat, and we as the parent are rowing our child to shore. And this is a marathon that we're going to be in. This isn't a 5-second get our mask on and then give it to our kids. This is for the long run. We're going to have to work hard for an extended period of time to keep ourselves feeling okay so that we can help our kids. And then I just put this here because I'm hoping that eventually we're going to get our rowboat to our desert island. And for me, I would probably have a margarita waiting on my desert island. So again, just say it's okay to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So if there's any questions about this, you guys can chime in. Otherwise, I will just keep moving along. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about self-regulation, I want to talk about sensory processing and how it affects self-regulation. And if I know I have a few people who've worked with me before that are chiming in, and you guys have probably seen this diagram. This is the diagram I use whenever I have a family that I've started working with to help their kids with some sensory processing challenges that they might have. So when we talk about sensory processing, most of us think of these external, what I'm going to call external senses. So this is their sense of sight, hearing, taste, and smell. So, and I know there's also touch, but we'll get back to that one in a minute. But what is actually super important, and it's more of the focus of what I work on, is the internal senses, which are the senses that tell you what's happening with your body. So I'm going to go over these in a little bit more depth. So the first sense that I'm going to talk about is called the vestibular sense. So this is your sense of balance and movement. So just like you have sensory receptors, like you've probably heard of the rods and cones. Those are the sensory receptors in your eyes to help you see. In your ears, you have this little apparatus. This is in your inner ear right here, and it's filled with fluid. And every time your head moves around, that fluid sloshes around, and it stimulates the sensory receptors in your inner ear. So it might make you feel dizzy, or it would send some information to your body saying, I'm running really fast, I'm jumping up and down, I'm spinning around in a circle, or my head is beneath my heart because I'm doing a handstand. And these sensory receptors also respond to the sense of gravity. So this helps us understand where we are in relationship to the earth. And if you think about this sense of movement, just a little preview of how sensory processing impacts arousal, think about being swung slowly back and forth on a swing versus going on a roller coaster. So for most people on a roller coaster, they either get really excited or really scared. So that's how that movement is affecting their state of arousal and how regulated they're feeling. Whereas if you are swung back and forth really slowly in a cradle or on a swing, you're going to feel, most people are going to feel really calm and relaxed, and they might even start to fall asleep. Or like when you're in a car, kids often fall asleep when they're in the car because they're driving at this constant pace, and then as soon as the car stops, they wake up. So again, that's how movement impacts our state of arousal. The next sense that I want to talk about is called the sense of proprioception. So this is your sense of body awareness, and the receptors for this sense are in your muscles and in your joints. So anytime you bend your arm, you're getting a signal from your muscle telling your brain how hard your muscle is contracting. You know, is it just kind of loose or is it really tight? And how far your arm is extended or bent. So what is it all the way out? Is it all the way in? Or is it somewhere in between? So this information is going into your brain and telling you where all your parts of your body are in relationship to each other. And the final sense that I want to talk about is called interoception. And this is the sense of the internal state of our organs and nervous system. So this is things like, are we feeling hungry? Are we feeling tired? Is our heart racing? I recently read a really interesting way to test your interoception, and I don't know how accurate it is, but it's interesting to think about. And what they say to do is set a timer for, say, 20 seconds and try to count, without feeling your pulse, try to count how many times your heart is beating. So try and feel how your heart feels. And then after you've done the 20 seconds and you've counted, say 20 heartbeats, then do the same thing and do another 20 seconds, but now take your pulse at your neck or at your wrist in the more traditional way, or use one of those blood pressure cuffs, and see how the two line up. So if you were pretty accurate that you counted 20 heartbeats and your blood pressure cuff also said 20 heartbeats, and that means your sense of interoception for that specific system is pretty accurate. Whereas maybe you only felt your heartbeat 10 times, but it actually beat 20 times. So this is how we kind of understand what's going on in your body. And you can see how if you can't feel your heart beating, there might be a disconnect between what your nervous system is doing and how your brain is interpreting the information and how it impacts your state of arousal. Okay, so then the last sense that I wanted to put in there is the sense of touch. And most of us understand the sense of touch. The reason why I don't quite lump it with the external senses is because even though it is a sense of the external world, it goes more with the internal senses, because it contributes to our understanding of our body and how, for example, you feel the feeling of your clothing on your body, you feel the chair that you're sitting on. So even though it's telling you something about the outside world, it really helps you have a better understanding of your body. So I put touch kind of in between the external and internal senses. So what happens after the sensory information is received is it all gets kind of funneled into your brain and processed through various parts of your brain. And I know this looks messy and busy, but that is kind of what our brain is. It's messy and busy. And the information, after it gets processed, gets combined together in different ways and gets routed to, for what I'm going to talk about today, to two different parts of the brain. One part of the brain is called the motor cortex. So any sensory information that goes through here, your body uses to figure out how to move itself. So it has to do with core strength, postural control, coordination. What's more important for what we're talking about today is that this sensory information also gets routed through a part of your brain called the reticular activating system. And this part of your brain is really important in regulating your state of alertness. So are you asleep? Are you awake? Are you anxious? Are you able to attend? So this is how that sensory information impacts our emotional state over here. So you can see it's all going through your brain, getting mixed together and going through a part of your brain that physically controls or physiologically controls your state of arousal. And then I put these arrows over here just because our state of arousal impacts our motor performance, and our motor performance impacts our state of arousal. So if we have a difficult time with our motor performance, we can be very challenged to keep ourselves regulated. And if we're not regulated, we can't access all of our motor skills. So like I was talking about before, if you are not feeling very good, I'm not expecting you to be able to shoot an arrow exactly at the little bullseye in the center of that ring, because your skills, even if you are capable of doing that, I don't expect you to do it when you're not in the best state of arousal. So how do these, let's talk a little bit more about how these sensory systems help change our state of regulation. So again, if you've worked with me, you've probably seen this dial. This is, I use a physical cutout version of this dial when I work with kids in the clinic. And the arrow points to the different states that we're in. And what happens is once we're aware of our state, we can use some sensory information to move us from one state to another. So if we're feeling, I might notice that a kid is feeling really wiggly and excited, and I might say, oh, look, you're in the yellow zone. Let's find a way to move our body into the green zone. But I might also see that a child is really sleepy or not paying any attention to what I'm saying. And I might think that, okay, well, that child is in the blue zone, and I need to help move his body into the green zone. So I'm going to use some sensory information to help wake that child up. So really important to understand here, and also going back to that previous slide, that we all have very different nervous systems and very different sensory profiles. So all of us interact differently with different sensory properties of activities. So just because a child is really wiggly and running around, that child might be in the green zone. If that wiggling around helps them pay attention, then I would say they're probably in the green zone. Now, if you see somebody maybe like taking some deep breaths, that might be someone who knows that they're in the yellow zone and they're trying to get themselves into the green zone. Or maybe they're covering their ears because the noise is too much and it's making them feel uncomfortable. So that's a strategy that people use to get themselves into this green zone. I think a lot of us have an intuitive understanding of what it is to be in this overstimulated zone, but a lot of us don't think so much about this understimulated blue zone, which is why I like the polyvagal theory, because it does kind of give some physiological reasons why we might end up in this blue zone. But also important to consider that if you have a child who's sort of bouncing off the walls in the classroom, well, that child, that doesn't necessarily mean they're overstimulated. That might be a child who is understimulated, having a hard time paying attention, and he or she is doing everything that she needs to do to try to get herself into this green zone. So she's bouncing back and forth and jumping up and down in her seat in order to get herself into this green zone. Whereas another child in the same class might be able to just sit here quietly in the green zone and without any need for any other information. So we all have very different profiles and different ways that we respond to sensory information. So that being said, there are certain sensory information that we anticipate to be calming. So this would be stuff that helps us push this dial down, push the dial down. Whereas other sensory information is alerting. So that's sensory information that's going to help us move the dial up. So you have to understand where your body is or where your child's body is, and what sensory input helps you move between one state and another state. So this is why, first of all, it's hard for me to just tell you a list of things to do, because I don't know how you're going to respond to it. I don't know how your child is going to respond to it. So a lot of it's going to be trial and error and just sort of figuring different things out. But in general, and I'll let you guys take a look at this list yourself, but in general, things like this deep pressure, slow movement, vibration tends to be really calming. So it helps us feel more grounded and more organized. Proprioception, that heavy work using the muscles, tends to helps us get down out of that overstimulated state. And sometimes, again, we see kids that are understimulated and we want to give them proprioceptive input because they're wiggling around because they're not getting enough to even feel their bodies. So this is things like pushing, pulling, climbing, anything like that. Whereas alerting information could be things like anything that's sort of irregular. So again, when you're driving in the car at a constant speed, that's when the kid falls asleep. Okay, so that's this constant movement. As soon as you stop the car, you've changed the movement. There's been a change in what's happening, and it's very abrupt, so it's irregular, and then the child wakes up. So, and then a lot of what's alerting is pretty intuitive to us. I did want to just mention some of this what we call oral input. So things like either eating spicy and sour foods or chewing and sucking can have a lot of impact on your state of regulation, because we have a lot of sensory receptors in the muscles of our jaw. So sucking and chewing can give you a lot of proprioceptive input, which tends to be calming. So I actually have a lot of kids that I work with who I give them gum, and even, their schools understand that they would rather have the kid chewing gum than like bouncing off the walls in school or perhaps at home. So we teach the kid how to chew gum safely and not get gum all over the place. But for a lot of kids, gum really helps because, again, it's hitting those sensory receptors in your jaw. So that's sort of the main content that I have to share with you. So what I thought we could do, and is I do have some lists of different strategies that we can use to adapt activities that are happening. But I thought it might be good if you guys can come up with some ideas too. So maybe I will try and come up with a couple, and you guys can come up with some too. And I'll kind of explain what I mean with this next example. So I think probably an occupation or activity that's on a lot of people's minds right now is distance learning, because it looks like especially if you're in the Bay Area, that at least for the beginning of the year, and we don't know for how much longer, we are going to be doing some distance learning, mostly distance learning. So I know a lot of people are feeling anxious about this, and it's something I'm starting to get a lot of requests to work with families on, is how we can kind of set up the environment and set up our routines to help our children succeed in distance learning. But this could also apply to you, seated at your desk. I know for me, I'm ending up doing a lot more sedentary work, just not being out in my clinic. So if you guys are doing more seated work, or even if you're doing the same amount of seated work, some of these ideas could help. So I'm going to throw out a couple suggestions, and I think we can probably unmute now if people want to chat. So I don't know if Parva, if you want to unmute people, or if people just want to unmute themselves if they have ideas. But I'm going to just put out a couple ideas, and then these are the things that I want you guys to start to be able to do. So when we're seated at a desk, what are some ways that we could help ourselves become more alert? And let's go back to this list of sensory and self-regulation types of input. So if we're fading away and having a hard time paying attention, some things that could help us, move that dial if we're kind of in this green zone spacing out, which a lot of kids are. And hold on, I would like some suggestions for high energy and need for physical. Yes. We don't have the time to give them physical input daily while at home all the time. Yes. So this is exactly what I'm going to be talking about right now, is suggestions for high energy. So when we say high energy, what often that means, and I have a lot of parents who are like, okay, I need to get rid of my kids' energy, or I need to go tire them out. And actually, we don't really want to tire our kids out, because our kids are cranky when they're tired. So I think parents are doing the right things, or have the idea that they need those things, but they don't know, but they're just saying, they think that they're tiring their kids out. But what you're actually doing when you're, giving them, so back in the days when we could go climb on the play structure, you're giving them the input they need to get out of this blue zone and into the green zone. So basically everything I'm going to talk about from here on out is going to be some ways that you can modify what you're doing at home to give them that physical sensory feedback. So what you're already doing, I'm hoping this will be, so when you're seated at your desk, listening to your Zoom calls, or, maybe if your parents are at work, you can't just let your kids run amok in the house getting the physical input that they need. So let's think about what are some things they can do when they're seated. So sitting, having different kinds of seating arrangements can be really helpful. So seating arrangements could be things like, when my daughter does Zoom calls, she's only 5, but she just naturally gravitated towards a rocking chair that we had at home. And she sits there and rocks back and forth on that Zoom call when she's doing, for school. Or if you need to have your kids sit down to do screen time or read a book while you're doing your calls, can you give them some different kinds of seating to be to be in? There's a lot of cool, like, bouncy chairs that you can sit in. So that's like a ball. And so that you sit up and down, you've probably seen them. You can buy like a therapy ball, or you can Google like a ball chair. And I'm going to put these on my website, and I'm going to start, I haven't done it yet, but I have like a whole bunch of different products and things that can be really helpful. But you can also just, search for like a yoga ball or peanut ball on therapy ball on Amazon. You can also put your kid in a desk chair that spins. So I'm in a desk chair right now that spins, and they can just take a quick spinning break in the middle of the other things that they're doing. So these are ways that we can give your kids some sensory input, sensory feedback. Heather, that put this comment. This is just one, so we're going to go over a lot more. But these are things that we can do to help our kids feel regulated. Okay, you have a ball and a seat cushion, but he seems to fall off and play with it. Is there somewhere we can help them learn how to use these tools? Well, you could go see an occupational therapist. They might teach you how to use them, and that is all of these suggestions, and this is the caveat that I go over with everybody that I make suggestions to, is the same activities, first of all, they might differ across different days, like whether or not they're going to work, and they don't work for everybody. So if your kid maybe doesn't have the best sense of balance, then they are going to constantly fall off the chair. So yes, so let's go over some other ideas too. Because you are definitely not alone. A rocking chair that has arms can be helpful, and there is a ball chair that has arms too. So if you go to Amazon and look up like bouncy ball chair or something along those lines, that one is not so unstable. You can also get what's called a peanut ball, which is, it's instead of being a round circle, it's the shape of a peanut, and your kid can straddle it, and they might be less likely to fall off of that one. So I do see that a lot. So hopefully these will be some ideas. And a lot of times the kids do play with them because they're like exciting and fun and kind of distracting. So if they continue to be distracting, then that means it's just not the right tool for them. Sometimes it's the novelty of the tool that makes it distracting. And after they've had a chance to play with it for, a week or two, then it becomes less distracting. So that's actually a question I get a lot. You know, if you have one, you know, what back when we were in school, people would say, oh, well, it's not fair to the other kids, and they all want to use it. And what they find, like when teachers put out a whole bunch of different seating, is that everybody gets really excited about them for the first couple weeks, and then the kids who really need the seating will keep gravitating to those different kinds of seats, and the other kids just keep up where they're at. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question, Heather. And Heather also mentioned that her kid falls off the seat cushion. So that's called a wobble cushion. You can also find those on Amazon. You can also get what's called a kick band, which is basically one of those stretchy therapy bands that you use to create strength, or exercise bands. You can tie it around a chair, and that lets your kid kick back and forth with that chair. So that when that happens, again, you're getting a lot of that sensory input without having to be running around the house. That's my hope. Another thing you can try is using some kind of weight and some kind of lap pad. So I'm just wondering if anybody else has any other things that they've tried that they feel like work, or some, just maybe this discussion has sparked some other ideas, because oftentimes I have parents come up to me with some ideas that they want to use, which I haven't thought of before. So if people have ideas, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. And your fidget, yes, so fidget spinners. So I think there's some utility to fidget spinners. And if you've bought a fidget spinner and you've tried it with your kid, and your kid loves it and it helps them concentrate, then I think that's great. My feeling with the fidget spinners is they often end up to be a lot more distracting than helpful. And one of the reasons is because those fidget spinners they're giving you some tactile input, but the tactile input, if you're needing a lot of movement and having a lot of physical energy, needing that movement, like you seem like you're a high energy kid, the tactile input that you're getting from the fidget spinner isn't really enough to give you what you need. So what I would suggest, if you want something specifically for your hands, and I think it might even be my next suggestion. Yes, so Emily, I'll get to you right away, but using Play-Doh and TheraPutty, or they now have this thing called Thinking Putty. So TheraPutty is like Play-Doh, except it's even more resistive, and it sticks together a little bit better, so it's less messy, in my opinion. And so you can actually go on Amazon and Google TheraPutty, but what also helps, but there's this stuff, I think you can even get it at Target. I've seen it at Target now, called Thinking Putty, and it comes in like different colors. So the difference between a fidget spinner and TheraPutty is that TheraPutty is, you're pushing and pulling on it, or Play-Doh, and that's giving you input to your joints and muscles. So that's that proprioceptive input. Now you're getting a little bit of proprioceptive input when you move your fidget spinner, but it's nowhere near as intense as you get with the resistance from the TheraPutty. So the TheraPutty would be a more effective way to kind of help with some of the regulation and help replace the physical energy that you need. So again, what I'm saying is your body needs, all of our bodies need this proprioceptive and vestibular input. And when we're sitting and not doing anything else, we're not getting that input. But so I'm trying to come up with some ways for when we have to sit to get that input. And then I'm going to go over some other kinds of activities around the house too. And then, so Emily said turning the screen off during a Zoom call helps her son with less visual content coming in. And I think that's I really like that one too. That's one of the suggestions that I give parents too. And I also talk about just going into a tent. So again, the visual content, especially with screens, and this is the problem with screens, is that it's just constantly flooding our senses with information. And it's just like your brain kind of gets like addicted to getting so much information. So that's kind of the problem with screens. But I love that idea of turning off the screen for the Zoom call. And also getting your child into some kind of like cozy nook, safe space. So, those little play tents, or you could build a fort where, I just had a kid yesterday who just put a blanket over the back of his chair and put some books on to stretch out the blanket and hold it down. And he crawled in underneath there. And so it was like this really nice, cozy environment without all of the extra visual stimuli. And you can even do schoolwork in there. You can also set up some kind of like a big, not a computer screen, but like a cardboard screen, sort of right in front of you and on the sides. We call them privacy shields, and they're used a lot in schools. But again, that kind of cuts off all of the distractions, like right in front of you and in the peripheral. Okay, so then Lisa said, how do you draw the line between distracting and helpful during Zoom classes? I let my daughter play with small toys and Play-Doh, but she comes up with elaborate scenarios, so I'm not sure if she's paying enough attention. Right, so that's a really good question, and that is an issue with all of the tools that we have, is that sometimes they are more distracting than they are helpful. So, I don't specifically know your daughter. Yeah, or distracting to, Heather said, or distracting to others is our worry too. So, so these are all like really valid concerns. And again, it's you kind of have to do a trial and error. So Lisa, if your child is playing with, so for the same reason, I would say the Play-Doh is probably better than the small toys to help with regulating yourself, because it has more resistive input. But you can check for her attention. So like, at least if we're on a Zoom call, those toys are hopefully not so distracting to other people, but you can check to see, what did she get out of that call? Like, did she get enough to go on to the next assignment? You can check for understanding to see how those things work. But again, a lot of the things that we have in our hands can be more distracting. So I tend to kind of go with some of these, like the lap pad or a weighted blanket. And also having like a squeeze top water bottle, or chewing gum, or if you're not into gum, like fruit leather. So those are things that we're not, because the problem is with things in your hands is that they become visually distracting. And so then that kind of takes away from what's happening. So trying to think of things with your body, like the cushion and the kickband for paying attention. And then Emily said, yeah, the tent is really great, and kids make them early on in the pandemic. Yeah, so my kids are making tents and forts a lot right now too. And I'm actually going to show you a product at the end. Well, I don't have the best picture of it, but I'll show you some things that we do for our active play at home. Okay, so another important thing, and this one is going to be harder to implement, but having movement breaks. So if you have a child that's old enough to be self-directed, you might set a timer if they have a Zoom call, and after every 15 minutes they might need to get up and do some kind of movement. Maybe it's doing some jumping jacks, or like standing up and bending down and touching your toes, because when you do that, your head is inverting up and down, so you're getting some vestibular input. Or maybe they just lift their arms out and spin around in a circle, and it can be as brief as 30 seconds of movement. But a lot of kids they can't just sit for that long, especially if you have kids who are like 6 and under or 7 and under. It's just really hard to sit for that long. And again, it's harder if you go and observe in a preschool or a kindergarten, even up to like 3rd grade, like you'll see the kids do not sit still. They are all walking around and like moving their bodies, wiggling their bodies. I see my daughter's 5, in her Zoom sessions, and she's only 5, but she gets up a lot. And I never tell her to go sit back down, because she actually, she's pretty mature and self-directed. She, when she needs to get up, she gets up, and then she goes back after 30 seconds. So if you've got an older kid, you could set, a timer for before and after, so that they can have that movement break. If you have younger kids, you might need to be a little bit more, disrupting your workflow to go in and give them movement breaks. So if that's not a possibility for you, maybe like doing some of these trying out some lap pads, and some oral input could be helpful. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. So I know chores probably don't take up that much of our day, but I'm just gonna briefly go over some things you can do as you're doing chores throughout the day. So my kid, what I find is you can get quite a lot of proprioceptive information, sensory information. Sorry, my chair is slowly losing its elevation here. When you guys have to take a break to do things like cleaning the house, you can get your kids involved and think about which chores you want to give them that give them more sensory input. So instead of maybe loading the dishwasher, can they help sweep the floor or do the vacuum cleaner? So, you know, I have my twins that are 18 months, they freaking love the broom. Like they're always taking the broom and pushing it around or pushing furniture around. So maybe at the, I think I have that one on here somewhere. But when you're, maybe what you can do is have your child keep their chair upside down on top of your desk. So you're gonna, so when they come to sit at their desk or their table or whatever, have them pick up the chair and put it underneath the table, or maybe they just have to move it from one side of the table to another side. And then when they're done, they move it back. So you're just working in some sensory input into the activity. Anything where you're picking stuff off the ground and putting it up gets your head moving. So that gives you some of that sensory input. Cleaning the walls, taking out the garbage, like anything that is heavy can be really helpful. I love watering plants is a really great one. You might even have, because you're carrying this heavy water bottle, if you notice that your child is having a hard time paying attention in a Zoom thing, you might say, oh, hey, you know, I saw a lot of parents that took that poll at the beginning said that both parents are at home working. So can you maybe say, oh, you know what, daddy needs this really heavy book. Can your child carry a book from one room to another room? Or maybe you don't want to disturb daddy, but you know what, this really heavy book, it needs to get put back on the shelf in your room. So can they carry it up the stairs and into another room? So, you know, just anytime they have to move around the house, just add them carrying something to it. Or maybe they have to, instead of walking to the bathroom, they have to bunny hop to the bathroom. So they're getting some impact into their joints. So I'm trying to think of some ideas for you guys that are not just not extra things you have to do, but just things that you're incorporating into what you're already doing. Does anybody have any other questions about chores before I move on to the last thing? Okay, I don't see any more. Okay, so my last set of strategies, and we're just about wrapping up here. So when you are doing active play at home, because I imagine you are probably doing some of it, you want to make that as impactful as possible. So when your kids need to have a break, and if you can't take them outside of the house, now some of these are for like if you were to go to a park, make sure you're getting, even walking to the park, because we go to the park, we have a park 5 minutes from my house because we don't have a yard. You know, your kid can push the stroller or pull a wagon. So like, again, as you're moving, give them stuff to hold. If you're not leaving the house at all, they can still wear a backpack around the house. They can spin around. When you guys are playing games inside the house, you could race from one end of the hallway to the next, but don't just race standing up, but get down on all fours and crawl like a dog or walk like a bear, so that again you're getting input into your arms too, so into your whole body. I love doing like upside down soccer, or bowling, so you flip over and push a ball underneath your legs. And then I'm a huge fan of the couch obstacle course. So I'm going to show you, this is my house right now. So I'm showing you this picture, one, because I wanted you to see like how messy my house is, so that maybe that'll make you guys feel a little bit better. But I don't know if you can see, but we have a whole bunch of different crash pads that we use. And like my daughter's 5. So, you know, if you've got a 10-year-old, this might be a little bit harder to construct, but I've still seen 10-year-olds do this too. Where you can jump off of this, you can make a slide and crawl down here, you can make like an upside down wedge and climb underneath some of these cushions, or just have cushions that you hop from place to place on. And you can see my space is not very big. This is like, I don't know, an 8 by 10 room here. But there's a lot of ways, you know, I have my kids climb up on this chair, they crawl across this couch, or we take all the cushions off the couch and like slide down them or make stairs or make like a leapfrog kind of thing where you have to jump from one cushion to the next cushion. And even just the activity of picking up the cushions and doing something with them is super like giving you lots of input. And also like making your own fort. So in addition to the tent, like set up this stuff like a fort, and then your kid has to pick up heavy objects and move them around, move some chairs around, move some blankets around, and cover everything with it so that they can have a little space that they can do for their next activity. So this is just different, some of the things I referenced. This Bloxy couch, I really love it. I think it's, you know, if you've got a kid like 8 or younger, I think it's really appropriate. For an older kid, it might be a little bit like they might have too much, like they're too big to use it, but you can check it out. If you're into buying more crash pads, I don't know if you can see this red one right here at the bottom of the screen, but Dick's Sporting Goods is having a sale on their really cool crash pads. They're like $30 right now, or you can buy like tumbling mats from IKEA or Target. So this has just been, we are loving our indoor obstacle course that we are setting up with not very much room. So that's sort of, those were my things. And I know a few people had some questions that I answered as we went along. But I don't know if we have time for a few more questions. If not, you can check out my website or email me at ann@hoothoot.ot. And that's what I've got for you guys.